Welcome to the fantastic world of Hanna-Barbera, a celebration of Bill Hanna, Joe Barbera, and the thousands of people past and present who have shared in their entertainment tradition. Here we go! And now your host, Greg Ehrbar.
Thank you, Chris Anthony. Welcome to the fantastic world of Hanna-Barbera. I am Greg Ehrbar, host of two podcasts, this one, and there's also Pop Culture Classics that sort of run alternately. So thank you for joining us. And today we have one of the giants of animation, somebody who is a true mover and shaker, an innovator. There's no way you haven't seen many examples of this man's work. He was the president of Hanna-Barbera and his own studios and record labels, and there's so much to talk about. But first, I'd just like to welcome and thank in advance, because this is really cool, Mr. FRED SEIBERT.
I am flattered, as you do uniquely well for all your guests, Greg. I really appreciate you having me here.
Well, that's high praise coming from you, because goodness, I really don't know where to begin, except, as sometimes we do at the beginning, a lot of your work focuses on music and especially cartoons. What was your path and your journey, as they say on the Oscars?
I tell people regularly that my journey was being a ping pong ball in the wind tunnel of pop culture. I thought it was music. Then I thought it was television. Then I thought it was cartoons. Then I thought it was the internet, all of which were primary pop culture strands through life. And it was probably in my late 50s before I realized that it wasn't that I abandoned a music career as much as I just went forward into other areas of pop that really interested me. Mm-hmm. And the world. I did it sort of in parallel with the world, I guess is the way to.
That is an instinct that is rare, especially among high-ranking people. It is a quality that, this is going to sound so suck-uppy, but that's a quality Walt Disney had. It's a quality that Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera had. Steven Spielberg, a lot of the people who seem to know how, with, successes and failures, how to hone in on what people want. And a lot of it, wouldn't you say, a lot of it's just common sense?
Oh, yeah, but, we don't all have common sense at every moment of our life. By the way, I would recommend to you the recent memoir of the last chairman of MTV named Tom Freston, mm-hmm. who was incredibly successful in the entertainment and media business. But I would say the first 150 pages of the book have nothing to do with that, and the most unique journey of a media executive that I've ever heard.
Mm. And folks, Fred was very instrumental at branding MTV. A lot of what pops into your head when you think of MTV was from Fred and his team. It's iconic stuff, and brand is a lot of what you've done. Can you explain to those who aren't in marketing what, Roy Disney said you put brands on cattle. What is brand?
I have come to sort of two simple ways of looking at it. It's certainly in terms of media. One is it's a guidepost. It tells somebody what you stand for, where you're going, what you hope to accomplish. And as an audience, as a viewer, as a listener, you have a clue as to where you're going when you see a particular brand. On the business side, it allows that brand to charge more for their wares than their competition. It's really, as simple as that. It just tells you a story that on both sides of the equation, the consumer side and the business side, that elevates the value of everything that's there.
Is it, in best cases, a combination of a brand's heritage and it's staying in touch with the contemporary stuff?
Certainly, if there is a heritage, unless it's a new product, certainly. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, in fact, with Hanna-Barbera specifically, I was excited to go and work there, having no credibility to work there. Like, there's no reason that anyone hired me for that job, because of my following of the story as a kid and as an adult. They had told me a story that I really wanted to be part of.
Mm-hmm. What were some of the Hanna-Barbera things that influenced you growing up?
Huckleberry Hound, Quick Draw McGraw, Yogi Bear, McGilla Gorilla, the Flintstones, and then a bunch of stuff in the background. Those were like my go-tos, along with Looney Tunes, all the time I was growing up. I'm 74 years old. I was born in 1951, and I was right there when they exploded and changed the world.
Yeah, they created, with the experience that they had in theatricals, they created a way of storytelling and character development on television that you didn't really do. You could do it in a feature, but not so much in a short. People didn't see shorts every day, every week, like they did with Hanna-Barbera cartoons.
Well, Joe was a genius at character. I mean, there is no doubt about it that his ability to distill a character and then execute it across all of the different pieces you needed, whether it was the design of the character, the dialogue of the character, the music that accompanied them, and the situation that they lived in. If you look at the breadth of his work over decades, I don't think anyone else, including, by the way, Walt Disney, sorry, but I don't think anyone else comes close to his ability to create characters, indelible characters.
And especially in such a quantity, because the studio had to stay busy to survive and to keep everybody working in a volatile, competitive environment. Not that you're a stranger to that, because the media kept changing all around you. Well, let's go back to MTV. Were you in on the beginning, and what's the process of what are we going to call this? How is this going to be a thing? You know, because MTV is actually, I think, leaving us now.
Well, I think that's been a little overblown. First of all, I would posit to say it left us quite a while ago. I think the internet was the death knell for what MTV represented. Whatever, they're closing some things, they're not closing other things, whatever. I was the first employee, actually. You asked a lot of questions, so let's take them a piece at a time. Where do you want to start?
Well, basically, people know that MTV initially was a video DJ radio show, but it had VJs who, my sister was particularly attached to it. So she said, put channel 52 on, put channel 52 on.
Yep,
and
good for her.
They got attached to the VJs, and there were things that were themed, there were things that were not. There were videos of different lengths, and it pushed albums, but it also took on a life of its own. You know, coming in with something that has never been done, you have to create an identity for it, in addition to, we're just going to run these videos with the whole idea of putting the information on the bottom left of the screen. Even it takes a lot of thought and probably a lot of time and people.
Well, here's the quick evolution. The executive vice president of the company was called Warner MX Satellite Entertainment. It was a joint venture between Warner Communications and American Express. The executive vice president of the company started with two channels: the movie channel, which is a competitor with HBO, 24-hour competitor when HBO was 7 or 8 hours a day, and Nickelodeon. They were both originally at a Warner experiment in Columbus in an interactive television called Cube.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a music fan. And on Nickelodeon, they put a show produced by Mike Nesmith, the guitarist from the Monkees, called
Elephant Parts?
No, that was his video. I think it was called Pop Clips, but I don't remember the exact name. And John Lack, who was that executive vice president, loved it so much, he started thinking about a 24-hour music channel, because the mission of Warner Amex Satellite was to create a series of new programming ventures to fill up what was now becoming the cable company, with the model of HBO and satellite distribution as their guiding post. So he hired an ex-program director and DJ from WNBC Radio in New York named Bob Pittman, a native of Mississippi, and had been very successful in radio around the country, and had done an early video show after Saturday Night Live in New York City called Album Tracks. And in 15 minutes, he had a format that not only aped radio, but when expanded to 24 hours, became the format of MTV. right? And because he was an ex-radio person now coming into television, he brought some ex-radio people into television, and I was one of those people. I was the promotion director at a country music radio station in New York City, WHN, 1050 on your AM dial. And I had learned from a brilliant but volatile mentor how to think about promotion. So he hired me in for the movie channel to do all of the interstitial programming, which was, I mean, honestly, I turned him down originally because I said, look, Bob, I watch television. I don't make it. I was a music guy through and through, kept trying to figure out how to get a job in the music business, which I failed at miserably. And a month after he hired me for the movie channel, he passed out a 1.5-page memo to everyone in the company, no matter what division they worked in, saying that we were going to start the music channel. The monikers at our company at that point, everything was going to be the blank channel. We were going to do the sports channel, the gaming channel, the shopping channel, all this stuff. And the reason that I got involved is I went in and demanded the job because I said, I know more about music than anybody here. I walked in this morning holding Musician Magazine and the rest of you were holding Variety. That it was like that. He hired me on the spot, and for my still lousy startup paltry salary, said I needed to do both jobs, the movie channel and the music channel. And a few weeks in probably, I said to Bob, so who's doing the logo? I was really fascinated with, I had started playing in a rock band when I was in high school, like everybody our generation did. And I was as fascinated with album covers as I was with the music inside the albums. And I said, our creative services group isn't going to do that, are they? You do it. And, I commissioned a few graphics here and there throughout my life, both personal and professional. And I didn't exactly know what to do. I thought about hiring a famous designer. There's a guy named Milton Glaser who was very famous across the design world.
Yep.
Who had really, in a book of his, tutored me on what graphic design even was. But I was scared to call Milton. I thought he would charge us more money than we had, and I was scared to call somebody that was famous. So instead, I called my friend Frank. Frank Olinsky was my neighbor. He's been my friend since I'm 4 years old and was a talented artist even at 5. He had worked in a variety of things, but I knew he was a music fanatic, a much bigger music fanatic than I was. And he had just started a little design firm with 2 friends at a Buddhist magazine behind a Tai Chi studio. He was like in a storage closet of a Tai Chi studio in Greenwich Village. My partner and I brought him to lunch and brought the team, the 3 of them, to lunch and laid out what it was. And I went, okay, we'll do it. And they started work. We never talked about a budget, which became an issue about a year later. And for a year, they presented sketches and designs of what the MTV logo should look like. And we just rejected them all. I think we rejected almost 500, by the time everything was done. Mm-hmm. And finally, I don't know, 3 months before I was hired a year before we launched the channel. So there's about a year gestation for everything at the channel, including that lower left graphic, that was there. About 3 months before, they came in with a pile of drawings. I think it was actually the first time they came to the office. We had always gone to theirs. And at the bottom of the pile was a crumpled up piece of tracing paper that had obviously been smoothed out and shoved in the bottom with what we now know to be the M from MTV. And I said, okay, that's the one. They were a little grumpy because one of them, the least design-oriented person in the trio, had come up with it. And the most talented person in the trio had not, and was sort of resentful of the fact that we did that. But whatever. They then enlivened it by doing a spray paint, like, graffiti was really coming in at the time, of the TV with little drips coming down and all that type of stuff. And that was it. However, I was obsessed with the way logos were supposed to be. And logos were set up to be a thing. They were just like a piece of granite, that has been carved out, and that piece of granite was going to be your logo forever. The question was the colors. And I'm really bad at color. I'm fine at, deciding what color I like, but I had no idea how to bring it. So I told them, we need the one and and they came up with 10 of them, including the one that got the logo killed, which I said, I need a really simple one for the sales department because they're not going to want anything rock and rolling. And so come up with something that's black and dark gray, so it'll like sort of hide on their stationery and business cards, which they did. I brought it up to the sales department and they said, you want us to put this on our stationery and our business cards? Forget it. And they sent me to the big boss. And I go to the big boss. I go through my whole spiel as to why, it's a great logo, blah, 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 blah. And the boss said, well, do you think this is going to last as long as the CBSI, which at the time was considered the most famous design in television history, in media history? And I just started laughing at him. I said, we're a rock and roll channel. We'll be lucky to be here in 5 years. I don't know if it's going to last, And all of a sudden, the startup, which had given me no budget, said, well, how much do you need to redesign this? I said, well, the big guys, they'll charge us $10,000 just to walk in the door. And he said, well, why don't you go to a real designer? And I'm like, you roll your eyes. And he said, well, how about I'll give you $40,000. Go to 4 real designers and see. So in my most weaselly move in my career, I think, I went to these 4 well-known designers, each of whom I admired, and I tanked the job. I gave them bad direction, and they came up with junk. And I brought the junk back to the big boss, and he said, oh, boy, these aren't very good. Bring me the original. And I showed him the original. He goes, you know what the problem is? I go, no, what's the problem? He said, the typography under the M that says music television, that's wrong. I said, okay, we'll change it. And I had Manhattan Design, the design company that Frank had, do 10 different versions of music television underneath. The boss picked Helvetica, and boom, we had a logo. And now the very last piece, I couldn't figure out which of the colors that I really liked. And I had them up on my board, on my cork board for like a month, staring at them. All of a sudden, the deadline is coming for when I have to have the first piece of animation to go on the air. And I look at them and I go, we're in television.
Yep.
Television moves. Maybe we can use them all at once. And for the first 2 animation companies that I commissioned, I went to them, showed them the bunch that Frank had illustrated. He had illustrated a bunch of here's one for the heavy metal show, and here's one for the new wave show, and here's one for the soul show. I said, we don't have any shows, but I like all these logos. And I gave them all to the animators. And the first set of animators used every one of the logos that I sent them in the first 2 pieces that we did.
Yeah, that's what pops in my mind immediately. And I always think of the Apollo one.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
I have so many favorites that I just did a book of them all.
Did you?
Yeah, I did a book of 250 called The Art of MTV.
Oh,
you can find it on Amazon. Yeah, it's great.
There's also a book of the CBS graphics.
Oh, no, it's unbelievable. That was a
like
very influential book to me.
And CBS, that font that they used for even for the Ed Sullivan and David Letterman and all that.
It was drawn, not designed, but drawn by a famous advertising guy called George Lois as his first job in media. He redrew Bodoni, a Bodoni bold face to be the CBS face. And by the way, was the guy who came up with the phrase, I want my MTV 40 years later.
Now, I wanted to ask you about that because it takes me back to childhood because I would say about, what, 20 years earlier, I want my Mapo.
1957,
Yeah.
the Hublies.
And that's sort of, I mean, maybe that's one generation earlier, but it does kind of connect. This is the thing, folks, it's fascinating about advertising and marketing creative is that, when somebody says, oh, I have this great idea, I have this one idea that's just going to do it for me. Well, the way it works with creatives is come in with 30, come in with 100, write 40 scripts and have them to me. We would sit in the hallway and write scripts to go back in to the executives. And it's the same thing with logos. Hundreds of logos, hundreds of taglines, hundreds of fonts. And then when that's finally decided on, then you have to have these things called style guides.
Yeah. We didn't have a style guide for years. And honestly, thank goodness. I
Yeah.
was the human style guide.
Which is better, really, because
yeah.
then you have well, I don't want to get into the left brain, but you can't adhere too much because you have to sometimes have a use that's not necessarily going to fit what's carved in stone. Just like phrases and, well, we're getting probably into the weeds here, but I do want to ask you one other question because of the idea of MTV. Which came first, MTV or the Jerry Todd Show on SCTV?
Probably Jerry Todd. Well, no, probably MTV. MTV came first. Yeah. SCTV was slightly later.
Oh, Jerry Todd was Rick Moranis, and it had these disembodied singer,
Yep.
Jerry Todd.
Jerry Todd. And a good morning to you in the wee small ones of a Saturday.
Back to something you were mentioning before, how we could be competitive and why we were competitive or how we thought about it, is we had all come from radio. And in markets like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, there were like 80 radio stations. And in order for a radio station to succeed, it had to separate itself from the others and have a personality. Television was the opposite. 3 networks. The average home in America had 2 networks, and everybody had to be everything. Every network had to have a little of everything. And having a personality for their so-called brand had to be very finely tuned to not tell anyone that it wasn't for them, especially adults. So when MTV came around, I was completely flipped out because we were going to be one of 30 channels. I'm like, how are we going to stand out? And my whole rationale for telling management that we were going to have this logo that was like so frenetic was, how else are we going to stand out? This logo is going to fit the TV screen perfect. It's going to dominate the space, as my mentor taught me. And it's just going to be relentless, so you have to pay attention to it. So it literally had a competitive frame that had come from our experience in radio of standing out from the competition.
Yeah, and you brought that to Hanna-Barbera. Now, before I go to Hanna-Barbera, you were at Nick at Nite also, right?
Well, my partner and I quit MTV after 3 years before it became huge. It was just huge because I was a bad employee. I really don't like having bosses. So we started an independent production company. We thought we were going to make TV shows, but we didn't know how. So we started getting hired, and MTV Networks, the parent company, hired us right back to be consultants, where we hoped eventually we could make some more money than they were paying us at the startup. And the first big gig that they sent our way was How to Fix Nickelodeon, which was the lowest rated cable network out of 30. And the work that my partner and I did brought them to the #1 cable channel across 30, which it lasted for 25 years. And then because Nickelodeon went off the air at 8 o'clock and the satellite transponder cost a lot of money, they wanted to figure out a way to fill the hours from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. And they've tried 15 different concepts, none of which worked. And finally, Jerry Laybourne, who ran Nickelodeon, came to us and she said, look, we've tried a million things. Do you guys have any ideas? We said, okay, well, let us think about this. Oh, and by the way, a horrible thing is required in this new channel. Our boss has bought 250 episodes of that horrible sitcom, The Donna Reed Show, and we have to use them. Alan Goodman was my partner, and he and I looked at each other. We had just failed at pitching a show to ABC that was essentially called The Greatest Hits of Television, which was going to be a half hour of sitcoms stripped across a week. Father Knows Best one week, Leave It to Beaver the next week. And we were turned down because ABC said, well, we're a network. We can't run anything in black and white. And when they mentioned the Donna Reed Show, we just went home and came up with the greatest hits of television for Nickelodeon. They named it Nick at Night, and we were off to the races.
It's funny, it's Donna Reed, because first of all, and Geraldine Laybourne is another giant of television history. And I remember at Disney, her name would come up because she did so much major stuff. But I don't agree with her on Donna Reed, and that and we agree.
I completely. By the way, the reason I was so jazzed, and it actually affected the programming strategy for Nick at Night going forward. I had been sick for 6 weeks in the 9th grade, and when my parents would go off to work, I'd quickly turn on the television instead of doing my homework. And the 9 a.m. rerun on ABC was the Donna Reed Show. And I watched it every day for 6 weeks. And I said to Jerry, look, I understand the gender dynamics and stereotypes that came out of the show, blah, blah. But let me tell you something. I watched that show every day for 6 weeks and I wasn't bored. So, okay, it's not great TV. It's good TV. Let's take good TV whenever we can, not just old TV, not just something that ran in black and white, but something that is good enough that the audience loved it.
Yeah.
And that became our first branding promise for Nick at Night, good TV.
Yes, I remember. And of course, I have all of the subsequent CDs, and there was some vinyl that was,
Mm-hmm.
And so with Donna Reed and Father Knows Best and I have actually been revisiting them on Leave It to Beaver now. Leave It to Beaver is sort of the gold standard because the writing is just so solid and
genius.
You can't go wrong with those characters. And it's got, Ward making cracks to June, but June is also feistier than I remember her. And it's like Peanuts. It's very real, mostly about kids and the dumb things they do. But Donna Reed and Father Knows Best, especially those two, get really criticized for being too perfect and too sweet and too nice. They were aspirational, and they were supposed to sell, furniture polish, and that's part of the reason.
Sure.
But it's a series. You have to watch a bunch of them to get the fact that Donna was tightly wound. Carl Betts' character, he yelled. There was one where she went to work with him, and he was monstrous. It's television entertainment for entertainment's sake. It's not designed to change the world. But where it did change the world was the Donna Reed Show, like Ozzie and Harriet, really led the pop TV. And you know this from music. You had Shelley Fabares, you had Paul Peterson, and even James Darren plugging hits on the show. And that's what led up to what the Monkees was. It was the Screen Gems, Don Kirshner machine.
Absolutely.
And people don't credit Donna Reed for that, but yeah, Johnny Angel and my dad, they were from the show. I know I'm rhapsodizing about Donna Reed, but I do love her, in all the movies she was in. But what was brilliant, what was great about what you guys did, and that should be in a book because I wish people with libraries would read it, with backlogs, what they call dead wood that isn't dead, is you took those shows and you had the audiences that loved them, but you also promoted them. MeTV does this to a degree as well. You guys made it funny how they were. And I love the one where Donna says, I love cheese.
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you an interesting thing about that. I ran the promo department at MTV. Then I ran it for Nickelodeon as an outside consultant. And then I ran it at Nick at Night. At Nickelodeon, we had hired a bunch of comedy people to be our writers, people who had never made television before. We taught them how to produce. And the first promo that one of the guys walked in with on Donna Reed is Donna loves Alex and Alex loves Shelley, and Shelley, is like one of those. And they all love dinner together. Isn't that icky? And I looked at the guy and I said, look, I really understand the gag you're trying to make. You know, at the time, David Letterman was flying high and irony was, very, very high. And I said, look, I get it, but we're not in the art business. We're in the commerce business. And our commerce is good TV, not great genius TV. We're not Alfred Hitchcock here. Eventually, by the way, we ran Alfred Hitchcock. That can't fly. And he came back with exactly the same promo.
Nick at Night is proud to introduce the perfect American family. They're the Stone family, and they love each other.
That's for being a good, decent man.
Aw, Dad loves Mom.
You know, Mrs. Stone, you're a remarkable woman.
Aw, Jeff and Mary love Mom. Dad loves Jeff and Mary, and they all love each other. They love everybody and everything.
What are you crying about?
I like cheese.
Watch the Stones love each other on the Donna Reed Show on Nick at Night.
We were able to have the fun of the promo of the sarcastic announcer going, Donna loves Alex, and Alex, like all that. But we could end on the note that how people felt when they were watching the Donna Reed Show.
And so you didn't insult. This is the other mistake that's made. You didn't insult and dump on the people that loved the show, but you also brought in people who might watch it for a different reason, and that's great marketing. And I will tell you the truth. My mother couldn't stand Donna Reed, and she hated the show because it was too sickly sweet. But I used the commercial to convince her to watch it. I said, oh, watch how they act. And it worked, and I got to watch it again.
Next up on Nick at Night's 10th anniversary week, it's the Donna Reed Show. She baked, she vacuumed, she wore pearls. And not only was she the perfect American mom, she was also the star of Nick at Night's longest-running show. It's next on Nick at Night, the home of classic TV for over a decade.
Well, our inspiration was the fact that there was a radio format called The Greatest Hits of All Time. And as I've looked back on a career, an enormous amount of what I've done was fueled by my resentment of the way the adults or establishment thought about the things that I liked. So, when the Beatles came out, which is my biggest North Star, my neighbor told me that wasn't real music and insisted that it was the adult neighbor, brings me over to his house and starts playing me Beethoven and Bach and go, this is real music. And it really annoyed me. When we came up with the greatest hits of television, it was because everyone thought that television was disposable. And the whole notion of that just infuriated me. Wonderful television wasn't at all disposable. And when I went to Hanna-Barbera, a guy who worked for me in advertising, who was a cartoon freak, was so disappointed that I was going to Hanna-Barbera. It was like, the same tree comes over and over again when they're running and this and that and the other thing. And I was determined to say, okay, that's fine. You think this is junk. You go and do what you want to do. I'm going to do this because to me, this is great television that came up. It really hit the spot for the audience that it was going after. And over and over and over again, I've tried to do in media what I felt wasn't being done, but was still on the pop side. I always wanted to be in the top 10. I believe the Beatles that you could make art and commerce simultaneously.
Well, that's what Disney did so brilliantly too. And speaking of images and logos and names, and we had this conversation when I interviewed you for the book, Hanna-Barbera moved so fast that they didn't do what Walt Disney did and what Walt Disney told Sid and Marty Krofft to do. He said, whatever you do, put your name first. And Hanna-Barbera, they sometimes put a Hanna-Barbera production at the beginning of a short cartoon, but except for some episodes of Frankenstein Jr. and Impossibles, it rarely, if ever, happened. And people didn't know what they looked like. People didn't know who they were until the 70s and the 80s. They only made few appearances. Bill Hanna was on To Tell the Truth, and they didn't guess him. They probably didn't see a priority for that, but I also feel like there should have been a priority for that and somebody working with them on TV like they did with Walt, directing them. And you came in saying that's exactly what they've always needed.
Well, I've often felt that where Hanna-Barbera had a blind spot was because they had been contract directors for someone else for 20 years. they were rightly so focused on the shows that they were making that they didn't understand the bigger picture for their company. So, you know, when there was a problem at Disney, when someone would attack Disney for whatever reason, Walt, he was at the front of the battle, telling the story of why this criticism was wrong, you know, whatever it might be. With Hanna-Barbera, you know, when people started complaining that Tom and Jerry was violent, the PR group at MGM took over and they answered the problem, not Joe and Bill. So when Hanna-Barbera was put together, they basically had a PR team. And when someone would attack Hanna-Barbera, they'd let the PR team be the lead as to how they responded. They never understood that their response was going to mold what people thought about their company. Like, our shows are number one, their hits, you know, what do you know? It was really like that. And I have to tell you, when I started my own cartoon company, I tried to put my name up front, but the networks that funded me wouldn't let me. And so I got back at them by having an end tag that was the most distinctive end tag in cartoons, which is how my personal company brand became something within the animation business.
Was that the Frederator?
Frederator.
Yeah.
We had a red robot that was designed not at my instigation, with my horn-rimmed glasses and my fuzzy East European eyebrows. And I let people go crazy with it the way that we had with all the logos that we were involved in. A friend of mine did a fantastic tag that just screamed our name. You know, in that 3-second tag at the end, he brought an intern in who went, Federator! And anytime I hired an intern, I said, oh, why did you want to be an intern here? Occasionally they'd mention a show that they liked, but what they really said, well, you know, the Red Robot. You know, it was very distinctive. And we had about 20 different versions of it that over the course of a series changed week to week. So people would see and hear our logo in a way that has disappeared in the era of streaming.
And maybe Hanna-Barbera were not allowed. Maybe the networks did the same thing. They said you can't put your name up front. But
could be.
But it was also not, because they sort of pioneered and they were sort of learning as they went. I don't think they realized what they had with their ID, because as kids, you know, because of the records more than even the shows, I would stare at that name and I knew what Hanna-Barbera meant. And it meant something really important to me, but it meant different things to other people, and they sort of let the public decide and the critics decide.
Also, though, you had the dynamic of tension between Bill and Joe. Bill was obsessed with survival. Like, his view of everything he did is, how are we going to survive to the next day? It's one of the reasons they sold the company so early, because he was panicked that their day would be over and that they would, you know, be fired again and go broke again. If it had been just Joe, he would have been very happy to be at the beginning of every cartoon, tell his own story of the cartoon so that people would know this was Joe Barbera's cartoon, you know, that type of thing. But I think the tension between those two, not opposing, but different perspectives is how to get through your day, probably helped suppress that idea of we should be up front.
Yeah, maybe. Because Joe was perfectly at ease on camera. Bill was a little shakier. I think he could have been directed, but it would, yeah, that probably, in a lot of partnerships, there is that issue of, well, you're more of the talker, and I feel like I'm not being heard and all of that stuff. So that could be as well. One of the things when you came in, they had the swirl logo, which was one of many logos. And actually, you can go on YouTube and see the whole line of logos. And you came in and, like Disney, took their kind of original signature kind of logo, and then did this neat thing with the vertical square, one for action, one for comedy.
So we had them in oval, we had them in square, we had them in vertical rectangle, we had them in horizontal rectangle. We had, I think, about a dozen altogether that we would use in all sorts of different ways. In fact, the animated version of it is not dissimilar to what Marvel uses at the beginning of their movies, with just like a whole bunch of the logos swirling around and ending up with a variety of them, you know, depending on which show it was.
And a instant montage of great sound effects.
Personally, my favorite project that I did in the 5 years that I was at Hanna-Barbera was the compilation of sound effects. That was a personal passion because when I was in college radio, the guy who was my partner at Fred Allen, my branding company, Alan Goodman, was in our LP library at the radio station, and one day comes running into the studio where I was making some promos, and it was a sound effects LP from the Hanna-Barbera library, and we thought we had died and gone to heaven, and started putting them in all of these weird jazz promos. We would have the Flintstones running or whatever it might be. So the idea of compiling those sound effects into that box set that came out was really just a great labor of love.
Yeah, there was the one for the public, which was the single one that Rhino did, and then Sound Ideas did a box set.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I actually, for a while, was consulting for a rock station in Fort Lauderdale, and I would just bring my HBRs in, and they would find these places because they were just so off the wall. But I always say that, except for Ben Burt's Star Wars sound effects, the most identifiable and iconic sound effects are Hanna-Barbera's, Fred's Tippy Toe.
I just gave a box of them to my 28-year-old filmmaker's son. And I said, these could come in handy sometime.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Maybe we should agree to meet another time, because I'd love to talk to you about Earl, the records, the recordings that you did, and also the What a Cartoon, because that's a whole story in itself. And I mean, good Lord, there's just so much to cover. And in the meantime, folks, you can visit Fred's website, FREDSI.
No.
Tell me, you might as well tell me.
Sure. FredSeibert.com. FREDSEIBERT.com.
No, I'm going to say it. FREDSEIBERT. So it's not I before E.
It's German, so it's backwards.
Oh, yeah.
The other one that I think covers a lot of what we're talking about today also is fredallan.org. FREDALAN.org, which covers all of our, or most of our Nickelodeon work.
Oh, that's cool. So there's a lot of neat stuff. I know you have a lot of, like, the liner notes from the Picnic Basket and things like that. Is there anything that you particularly like to draw people's attention to right now?
No, if I knew that, I would have a brand. And I'm really serious. I guess the brand ought to be the ping pong ball in the wind tunnel, because the truth is, depending on who the listener is, a different part of what my biography writer entitled My 5 Lives, they're each interesting to someone else. The cable era by itself as cable television media is interesting. The internet era is fascinating for a very parallel set of reasons. And all of that has nothing to do with the actual stuff we made for those places.
Well, thank you very, very much, Fred Seibert. Again, FREDSEIBERT.
You bet.
For all you've done, and thank you all very much for listening. I know that there's a lot of podcasts out there, so for you guys to take time to listen, it's deeply appreciated. So thank you for listening to the Fantastic World of Hanna and Barbera, and until next time, bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed the fantastic world of Hanna and Barbera with Greg Ehrbar. Please join us again, and many thanks for listening.